And the question is, can we further improve this? This is good, but can we further improve those results? The classifier that we now use is just basically separating tinnitus patients or pain patients or Parkinson patients from healthy controls. And you can do that in just linear, or you can make fancy demarcations. But Marco Congi has developed a classifier based on in Riemannian space, where you can have as much dimensions as you want. So you do not only have to have yes or no, but you can add, because you can add as many dimensions as you want. In theory, you should be able to say, yes, this patient has pain, and score it on a scale from 0 to 10 for intensity, for unpleasantness, for duration. So we're going to try and apply this now to another kind of classifier to see whether we can extract more information just on the EEG and get a higher and a better sub classification as well. And then another question is, if it exists, then we should be able to record it directly from the brain in some individual patients. So here you've got a 36-year-old patient with intractable tinnitus since 14 years, bilateral pure tone, and the tinnitus is perceived as loud, scoring 9 out of 10. And there is an audiometric dip at 6,000 hertz, and the tinnitus pitch is at 6,000 hertz, which suggests that it is a deafferentation-related tinnitus, and therefore it would fulfill the criteria of thalamocortical dysrhythmia. An fMRI is performed showing activation in the auditory cortex. We target this area with transcranial magnetic stimulation, and we get a very good reduction of the tinnitus for a very short time, a couple of seconds only. And so we go ahead and implant an electrode on the auditory cortex, and then we just blindly program, and we got the best reduction of the tinnitus when we made this pole positive and this pole negative, and the other ones are just not activated. Then basically we took the fMRI and increased the statistical threshold, so only a couple of voxels are left. And what is interesting is that this voxel is actually co-registered with the part where the maximum tinnitus suppression can be obtained. What we then did is we did bipolar recordings from the adjacent electrodes, and what you see here is distally from the part where we think the pathology is that you got the normal 1 over f with a 10 hertz peak, and this is a different scale, so basically this just continues there. But so this is a normal 10 hertz peak. This is a relatively normal 10 hertz peak next to it. Now what you see here is you get a 10 hertz peak that is not as clear, and a second little peak coming. And then here you see a theta peak and an alpha peak that is gone, and you only see it when the patient perceives tinnitus and not when the patient does not perceive tinnitus. So this suggests, yes, there is at least a theta peak, and gamma seems to be present as well. We record till 45 hertz, so in between 30 and 45 we consider it as gamma, and that is increased as well. Now, and interestingly, the theta band correlated with the tinnitus intensity, and the gamma was highest at the area where on fMRI you find the bald spot. So the gamma was highest exactly at the bald spot, and then the more distal you go, the lower the gamma becomes, and the lower the beta 3 becomes. But some people even suggest that making a distinction between beta 3 and gamma doesn't make any difference. But if thalamocortical dysrhythmia exists, then you would expect that they're coupled. So similar images as Jay has shown before, autocorrelation. So you put frequency here and frequency there, and then when you record from distally on the electrode, where you say, well, there is no pathology there, that's normal cortex because we see a normal alpha peak. Then what you see is that in the lower frequencies, the delta and theta, there is no increased coupling between theta and gamma, whereas here you see red means more coupling between theta and gamma at the area of pathology. And then when we looked at more patients, actually you see the same thing, that there is delta theta and coupled to 35 to 45, and this is in, I think, 5 or 6 patients, and not in the area where there is normal activity. So it looks as if thalamocortical dysrhythmia really exists as a model, at least in tinnitus. So we should find the same thing in pain. This is a patient with an amputation of the right arm and phantom pain. We use TMS. We can reduce the pain by half. We implant and we have no success. Nothing really improves. So we reposition the implanted electrodes, because the problem is on the fMRI you see a lot of bulb activation, and so then we record from those implanted electrodes, and what you see here is normal alpha peak, basically all normal alpha peak. There is some pathological activity here at this pole, and an increased higher frequency peak right here. So right at the end, at the lower end of the electrode. So what we then asked is, can you increase the threshold, and we get a smaller bolt signal over there, which is co-localized exactly at the same spot where we find pathological theta and pathological high frequency. Here you have got another patient who has been operated multiple times. She has deafferentation of the skin and a phantom eye on her that she feels on the cheek. And actually she came to see me not because of that, but because when she was walking she would always run into the right side of the door. Or when she was she came from the Netherlands, when she was using her bike, she would always end up in the ditch on the right side. The problem was that there was that she felt that her eye was there, but of course the visual information came through the normal eye. The question is this deviation a problem of integrating somatosensory and visual information, and can we do something about it? So she had basically a misperception of localization despite a normal vision, and she had hyperalgesia in her forehead and allodynia, and basically she didn't feel anything except for pain. Which is called anesthesia dolorosa, but basically is very similar to phantom pain. We used a mirror test, which for her then felt that her eye was normalizing, and then we used TMS on the area that worsened in the scanner. So she goes in the scanner. When you touch the skin, it worsens the pain. On the contralateral side, so we use this as a target for TMS. What you see here is actually hand movement. So, and we could replicate this, and with placebo she had no benefit, and then depending on the frequency that we used, she had best results with low frequency stimulation. So we implanted an electrode overlying this little area, basically that helped her for getting a reduction of her pain. So from a clinical point of view, you can record from the brain directly, and you seem to find this thalamocortical dysrhythmia as well when you record from the brain. The support vector machine learning also can detect it, so probably it does exist as a clinical entity, and therefore it is useful to look for this coupled or nested theta gamma activity. If the normal activity should be alpha gamma, then the theta gamma is pathological. And as mentioned before, it's not real theta, it's actually slowed alpha.
About a year ago, I had a neurosurgeon come to me and say, you process data, and I want a Loretta of 6 hertz. So he asked me basically for a Loretta analysis of 6 hertz. And I'm saying, well, why? He says, well, I'm a neurosurgeon, and I work on pain patients, and I do thalamotomies. Oh, well, to turn off pain, you're going to blast their thalamus with radio frequencies to turn off the pain. And I said, well, what kind of success do you have? He says, what, about 50%? Oh, well, geez. Are you going to line up for a half a chance for somebody damaging your thalamus to turn off pain? But if you're a chronic pain patient, if somebody gives you a half a chance, you're going to take it. So I'm thinking, well, yeah, God, that's terrible odds, but why 6 hertz? And he says, well, he's read the literature and people have the 6 hertz signal. And I said, you need to talk to Dirk. You know why I like this guy, the neurosurgeon, and I put Dirk together with him, and they talked about thalamocortical dysrhythmia. And I told him, well, I can do Loretta of 6 hertz, but that's not what you're looking for. You're looking for slowed alpha with surround of gamma around it. So let me decompose the EEG with independent component analysis, and I will find a component that has slowed alpha that looks like theta with gamma in the component. And if I see that on the somatomotor area, this is somebody that will probably have a good success with your blasting of their thalamus with radio waves to turn off their pain. And, I talked to Dirk, and Dirk shared his paper before it was published, and he thought it was fabulous work. And, he said, well, let's do a few and see. I can always give you 6 hertz, Loretta, but let's do this crazy idea of independent component analysis and cross-frequency coupling within the component. His success rate in the last year has gone from 50% to 80%. And all I do is look to see whether they have what the doctor and I call real pain, but it's not like if you have pain that's not this model that you don't have pain. You can have a cingulate problem where you overfocus on a sensation and you interpret that as pain. It's not the same thing, but you can have a valid complaint of pain. So we're not trying to invalidate that, but we just, real pain is the stuff that he can fix, and the other kinds of pain we can talk about, but he can't fix it with the blasting of the thalamus. And this thalamocortical dysrhythmia that Rodolfo Linus came up with was originally thought of as a theory. The machine learning vector and neurosurgery basically have proven the theory to be real. And when you apply the theory clinically, which nobody really had done in the US, not to my knowledge at least, it works. And the proof's in the pudding. Dirk's work works. And when the neurosurgeon looked at his outcomes, he started sending a lot more data to us. So he's actively doing neurosurgery based on the EEG component. Now, there's no existent statistic that existed to look within a component for cross-frequency coupling within a component until I talked to these group down in San Diego and I told them about what we're doing, and they said, EEG Lab can, we'll do a little module patch for EEG Lab, and now you'll be able to look at that statistically as well. So it's now built into the software that's shareware. Dirk's brilliant insight and my stupid stumbling has kind of come up on something that created a wonderful new software package that can actually look at this.
Can you also see the cross-frequency coupling in the ICAs in WinEEG?
Yes, that's the software I use is the WinEEG software. The ICA that is built into WinEEG is Infomax, which is a specific kind of ICA. It's really robust. There are other kinds, Runica, R-U-N-I-C-A, Amica, A-M-I-C-A. Those are both. Runica is not quite as good as Infomax, but Amica looks like it's probably at least as good, maybe a bit better. You come up with a new tool, you got to bang around with it before you know what it's good for. If I handed you a brand new hammer today, you'd have to bang with it to figure out what kind of hammer it was. Is it a claw hammer to pull things out? Is it a ball-peen hammer meant to bang on metal? Is it a tack hammer intended to do little things? Is it a sledgehammer? What kind of hammer do you have? So, we come up with a tool and we basically play with it. The difference between good and bad gamma is phasic versus tonic. And the thalamocortical dysrhythmia, the gamma is on. You know, if you lose the input to the area, the lateral inhibition is turned off, and the areas around it basically invade. So in tinnitus, you have tonotopic shift. You know, you have phantom sound. A frequency adjacent to it is now, perceived. So you end up with screaming tinnitus at a frequency you don't even have. So, but the difference is, you can slow your alpha with meditation. Alpha drifts into the theta band with advanced meditation, but that's the state, and it's not meditation. It's the state. The content of meditation is different. State and content are important to differentiate. You can have the same state and be a yoga meditator and a Zen meditator. But they're very different. They're very different meditations. A yoga meditator who has learned in their philosophy the content of that state, that the outside world is false, and if you put a repetitive stimulus to them, they habituate almost instantly. Why would you pay attention to it? It's false anyway. So their response goes away almost instantly. The Zen meditator, on the other hand, same state, different content, what they've learned, and the master's mind is the beginner's mind. Every perception is a fresh perception. They almost don't habituate. And the normal person sits somewhere in between, assuming that you can define normal somehow, the absence of pathology maybe, I don't know. But it's a good question. You can slow alpha. It's not the same as your alpha being slowed because of a lack of input. That alpha has been dragged kicking and screaming down to a slow frequency it didn't want to be at. And it's now surrounded by gamma. The gamma is related to the intensity of the tinnitus, how severe the phantom pain is, how frozen your postures are in Parkinsonism, and in some way to the severity of depression. So it's not constantly going on and off and on and off and on and off like healthy neural networks. A neural network is formed for a purpose, and then it goes the hell away to get out of the way for some other stuff to happen. And gamma happens when the network is bound, and when it's no longer bound, it goes away. It's a resonant property of being bound. So it's more content than state. And as such, it's a bit different than pathological gamma of tonic persistent gamma versus phasic brief bursts. Gamma occurs in chirps, and it's nested. Again, we're all bird brains in neuroscience.
Rick, I'll quickly show you some data of ICA, which as Marco Congedo explained me ICA as a fruit salad where you just take away, separate all the fruits from the fruit salad. So even I could understand what ICA really meant. And then we analyzed two databases. So Marco Congedo had two databases, and he did an independent component analysis on the database looking at absolute power and relative power normalized for frequency and normalized for space separately. And the images I showed you this morning is something new he developed where actually he does both at the same time. What is interesting is that when you look at those different networks, then actually this looks like a salience network, the first one, and in the second database, it's almost exactly the same. So it seems to be reproducible. Another network is more posteriorly oriented and is exactly the same in the two networks. So basically what he found was that in normal EEGs, he found seven different components that were independent, but interestingly, even though they're independent, they communicate with each other. So, which is logic. The different brain networks have to interact in some or another way. But when they communicate in very discrete frequencies. The first component communicates to the third component So basically, the salience network where the posterior part of the default mode network and at different frequencies, in alpha and theta, and there is some beta communication as well, and C3 communicates, communicates with C7, which is more the lateral part of the default mode network, alpha and also in beta. And then the question is, okay, that's good. We can learn something more, but can we use it in pathology as well? So we did exactly the same in tinnitus patients, and actually we could define two components that were correlated to the loudness perception, and four components that were related to distress. Now, what is in tinnitus, you have four grades of distress. Grade 1 basically means there is no distress. Grade 2 means there is a little bit of distress. 3 is there is a high distress, but those patients are still not yet psychologically decompensated. And grade 4 is psychologically decompensated tinnitus. So when you look at the different components, there are, for grade 1, all these components do not communicate. They're not distressed or very little distress. Now, when there is a little bit of distress that follows, then you see that there is a communication that starts between the distress components, and there is communication between the loudness components, but they are still not interconnected. So loudness and distress is not yet interconnected, whereas in grade 3, you see a very discrete frequency at 10 hertz between the distress network or the distress components as defined by blind source separation and the loudness components. And this is a problem, because that means if you get distress for whatever reason, the tinnitus goes up, becomes louder. So and a grade 4 is exactly the same connection, but at a little bit higher frequency. And now we wanted to know, okay, but where is this localized in the brain? And it is basically between the parahippocampal area and the subgenual anterior cingulate that you've got these pathological connections at very discrete frequencies. So you can even use this independent component analysis to better delineate how this highly distressed tinnitus develops, and then you could for example, go ahead in the future and implant electrodes somewhere on this connection, and then try to jam the 10 hertz activity, or try to block it by adding noise at a low frequency band. So you can also use it in order to try and develop treatments that might be beneficial for pathology. And so apart from that, these independent components tell us more about default mode network, etc. You can also use them in pathology.
The big problem that we run into is essentially decomposing the EEG. It's got lots of parts to it. And in order to tease apart what pieces make it up, we have to basically break it down into the pieces. And there's lots of ways to do this. The EEG is full of artifacts, eye movements and muscle and various signals that are artifactual. And you have to be able to tease out which is which and take out the artifact. And we can see here eye movement. This is a fairly rapid eye movement. You can see small eye flutters. They're not saccadic eye movements, but the person has a little bit of an excessively fast eye movement. And in the raw EEG, it actually disturbs not only the slow frequencies, but all the way up to the alpha band is eye movement related content. So it doesn't just ruin delta. If you have eye movements in the data, it ruins delta and potentially alpha or theta, depending upon how fast you move the eyes. Now, years ago, Bob Thatcher and I had an argument online as to whether alpha could be disturbed by eye movements. And he said, well, you can't move your eyes any faster than one blink every, 6 blinks in a second. That's as fast as any voluntary movement can happen. You can prove it yourself by tapping your fingers, and you can only go about 6 taps in a second. And I said, well, that's for voluntary movement. Rather than argue, I posted a paper on an oculogram with nystagmus, which is an involuntary eye movement, at 20 hertz. So, people that actually measure the eye movement found that however fast you move the eyes is how fast it can end up disturbing the EEG. So it's not just for the delta band. And you can't just get rid of below 3 hertz and get rid of eye movement, because you can have faster eye movements. Essentially, spies have the same kind of a problem. If we're in a cocktail party, and I'm a spy, and I've come into the room and I stuck microphones in the chandeliers and under the tablecloths and scattered them around the room, and I recorded the cacophony of the cocktail party, how could I find one voice out of all that noise? Well, the spies in the world have tried to fix this. It's very much like trying to figure out the sources of the EEG. And the spies in the world basically tried factor analysis, and it helped, but it didn't really identify the voices. They tried principal component analysis, and it helped a lot more than factor analysis. But, principal component analysis is only good for Gaussian distributions. And what's a distribution of a whole bunch of people chattering? I mean, this is not a Gaussian distribution. And independent component analysis is designed for non-Gaussian distributions. So here's a Gaussian distribution. We've all seen Gaussian normal distribution as a single curve, the bell curve with the norms at the middle. But this is 3 dimensions. So it's kind of like a rugby football. It's got ends in a middle. And PCA does a nice job with a normal distribution saying there's this axis and this axis. And that describes the distribution with 2 components. Very nice work, but not everything is a normally distributed function. You can have non-Gaussian distributions like this. And it's not like a football. This has got 2 separate axes. And PCA basically says there's this axis, the length, and this axis, the width. But this isn't a normal distribution. That's PCA's answer. And it doesn't give you the right answer at all. ICA, which is appropriate to non-Gaussian distributions, identifies the 2 primary axes without any difficulty at all. Now, this is the same basic thing. And if you look, the ICA identifies the 2 axes of the distribution, and PCA, again, fails. So all the spies in the world basically say, well, we can't use PCA, we'll use ICA. And let's look at it with waveforms. I mean, EEG people like wiggly lines, not Gaussian distributions. Let's look at some wiggly lines. If you combine a sine wave with a triangle wave, which doesn't show very well in the light, it gives you a complex waveform. PCA does not deconvolve them into the 2 component parts, but ICA pulls out the triangle waves and the sine waves perfectly. Eye movement. Well, this is an eye movement artifact, a little bit of the range of variability, but this is the eye movement artifact. You can see the eyes are moving there. And if you then do an inverse solution for where does this come from with an idealized brain, it comes from the eyes. Ha! Surprise, And let's say we actually put it on the person's own MRI, because in EEG lab and MATLAB, if you've got the person's MRI as a matrix, you can actually superimpose the EEG on their own MRI instead of the idealized MRI of the Loretta. So here they basically show that the source comes from the eyes and the muscles that move the eyes. Spies, facial recognition. They use ICA and PCA both to identify faces. If you walk around any major city in the world now, you're on camera somewhere, and they've got a database, and they're going to look, see the configuration of your face and see whether you're on their list of nasty folks that they don't want to have in their city. So this comes in handy for spy folks. But the world isn't just spies, although if you're a spy, I guess it looks like that. They actually take out artifact from people moving, running with EEG on. You can take out actual artifact from high-density recordings, but normal recordings as well. And this is, again, artifact rejection using ICA.